The boarding area at Gate 6 of San Francisco International buzzed with the usual air of distracted urgency, shoes tapping impatient rhythms against tile, the mechanical lull of rolling luggage, families saying rushed goodbyes, all the daily choreography of modern travel. But this morning, something quieter, sharper, was about to cut through the mundane. A moment no one saw coming. A moment that would become a national headline. The woman standing at the front of the first-class line had no intention of becoming anyone's story. She was dressed simply, pressed slate gray slacks, a cream blouse, a navy trench coat, a delicate chain at her neck, no flashy rings. Her nails were clean and unpainted. Her hair was pulled into a neat twist, and her eyes, though kind, held a weight most couldn't recognize. She stood tall, poised, and absolutely still. Her name was Commander Jordan Blake, and today was the first time in over 20 years she wasn't wearing her badge. To anyone watching, she might have seemed like a non-profit executive or a visiting professor, maybe a government consultant. No one would have guessed she was the sitting chief of police of Los Angeles, one of the most powerful women in law enforcement on the West Coast. That fact was tucked away in a badge inside her carry-on, along with decades of scars, experience, and memory. Today, she wasn't flying as a symbol of authority. She was just Jordan, a woman en route to the National Law Enforcement Summit in Seattle. And after years of working twice as hard to earn her space, she had finally allowed herself something rare. Comfort, first class, a window seat, a moment of stillness at 30,000 feet. But peace has a way of attracting violence in disguise. The gate agent at Sierra Pacific Airlines was young, perhaps early 30s, her blonde hair pulled into a strict ponytail, her mouth fixed into a permanent line that tried to look like a smile. Her name tag read S. McKenna. "Next," she said flatly, not looking up. Jordan stepped forward, lifting her phone to display the digital boarding pass. Seat 2, A, first class, paid in full. McKenna took the phone. Her eyes flicked up, saw Jordan, and paused. Too long. Then came the voice. Cool. Doubting. This must be a mistake. A few heads turned. Jordan, with the patience that years of navigating rooms not built for her had sharpened to a blade, kept her voice calm. "That's my ticket." McKenna didn't blink. "Do you have the confirmation email? Or a receipt? Sometimes the system glitches." Jordan's face didn't move. "Scan it." McKenna hesitated, then scanned. Beep. Accepted. Cleared. But McKenna didn't let go of the phone. "I just need to double-check something." She turned to her terminal, began typing with unnecessary slowness. Behind Jordan, the line swelled. Murmurs. Shifting feet. A cough. Jordan could feel the temperature of the room change. Not physically, but socially. The air thickened. Eyes began to weigh on her skin. Not everyone was watching, but enough were. Not overtly. Just the kind of attention people give when something seems off. But what was off? Her skin, her silence, her certainty. McKenna leaned toward a nearby agent. A whisper, a glance, another delay. Jordan spoke again, voice low but firm. "Is there a problem with my seat?" The other woman looked startled. At the calmness, maybe. At the fact that Jordan hadn't escalated. She checked her screen, then spoke quietly. "It's fine. Let her board." McKenna handed the phone back like it was contaminated. "You're all set. Enjoy your flight." Not a smile. Not a thank you. Just that flat, begrudging tone that always sounds like something else. Jordan walked forward without a word. She had learned long ago that confronting every indignity would exhaust her. And the real battle wasn't here? Not yet. But standing to the side, just before the jet bridge, another pair of eyes had been watching the whole thing. Captain Helena Whitmore, a 28-year veteran of the airline, leaned casually against the fuselage door. She had a reputation, one of excellence, yes, but also of rigidity. Her crew nicknamed her Iron Wings. She called it a compliment. She believed rules were meant to be followed, ranks respected, and first class preserved. Preserved, as if comfort was a heritage, not a service. Helena's eyes narrowed slightly as Jordan passed. She said nothing, just turned and stepped into the cockpit. 2 minutes later, Jordan reached her seat. 2A window. Quiet. She placed her coat gently above her in the overhead, stowed her carry-on under the seat ahead, and exhaled. But the discomfort lingered. The kind that came not from turbulence, but from something far more ancient. The flight attendant moved through the cabin, smiling brightly at passengers in 1A and 1B, an elderly couple in matching cardigans. To the man in 2B, a hedge fund type with a Bluetooth still in his ear, she offered champagne with a wink. Then she reached 2A. No smile. Just a question, clipped and formal. Drink? Jordan met her eyes. Sparkling water, please. No, ma'am. No napkin. No eye contact. The attendant walked away. Outside, the sky was beginning to soften into a soft marine gray. Fog curled like ribbon beyond the windows. In a few minutes, this plane would rise through that haze and disappear from view. But what no one knew, not the captain, not the flight attendant, not even Jordan herself, was that this wasn't just a flight. It was the beginning of something none of them could undo. By the time Flight 1723 landed, one woman's silence would shatter an illusion, and another's illusion of power would be ripped apart by the truth. Because when you strike someone thinking they are powerless, when you humiliate someone because you believe they don't belong, you better be sure they're not someone whose very life has been built on documenting, investigating, and dismantling injustice. Jordan Blake knew how to remain silent, but she also knew when to rise. And this flight, this seat, it was about to become the stage for a reckoning that would make headlines across the country. The kind of reckoning that begins in first class and ends in handcuffs. From the outside, everything looked perfect. The soft clink of silverware, the rustle of newspapers, the quiet hum of a cabin cruising at 36,000 feet. The sky outside stretched endlessly blue, unmarred by even a wisp of cloud. But inside the aircraft, particularly in row 2, something was festering beneath the surface. And it wasn't turbulence that would shake this flight. Jordan Blake, seated in 2A, had maintained her composure for most of the flight. She had endured the early slights, the dismissive looks, the calculated delay at the gate, and the unspoken assumption that her presence in first class was a clerical error. She had dealt with all of it the way she'd been taught, in silence, with posture, with grace. But when flight attendant Tricia Morgan walked past her seat for the third time without acknowledgement, her patience began to crack. Not visibly, but internally, where dignity tends to fray first. She had requested water. Nothing fancy, just water. The passenger across the aisle had received his scotch with a smile. The couple in row 1 had been offered their third refill of champagne. Jordan? Ignored. Erased. When she pressed the call button, Tricia appeared immediately, but only to turn the light off without making eye contact. Not a word spoken, not a glance offered. The deliberate neglect was not lost on Jordan, nor was it accidental. What made the situation more insidious was how Tricia interacted with everyone else. Over-the-top warmth, performative charm, eye contact, and laughter. Jordan had watched it unfold like a script she already knew the ending to. And that familiarity, that cruel recognition, cut deeper than any outburst ever could. She opened her phone and resumed documenting everything. Timestamps, names, the moments people believed were too small to matter, but which built the very foundation of discrimination. It was while she typed her notes that she felt it again. A presence, dot, dot. Looking up, she found Captain Helena Whitmore standing 2 rows away, arms crossed, eyes locked on her with the unmistakable weight of scrutiny. Jordan stared back, not with defiance, but with the still, unmoving gaze of someone who knew what happened when you blinked first. Whitmore turned, muttered something to Tricia, and disappeared back toward the cockpit. Not even 10 minutes passed before the announcement came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're conducting a routine security check in the forward cabin. We thank you for your cooperation. Jordan didn't move. She didn't have to. She knew this wasn't a routine check. It was the next step in a sequence. First suspicion, then silence, then escalation. Sure enough, 2 minutes later, Tricia returned, this time flanked by a man in plain clothes. He looked nondescript, but Jordan's eyes flicked to his badge clipped discreetly on his waistband. Air Marshal. Tricia spoke first. Her tone was artificially gentle, but the words were surgical. We've received a tip about a potential security concern regarding one of the carry-ons in this section. For safety reasons, we'll need to check your bag. Which carry-on? Jordan asked, her voice measured. Yours, Tricia replied. Based on what information? Tricia didn't answer. Instead, she nodded to the air marshal, who stepped slightly forward. Ma'am, he said, we're following protocol. I'd like your cooperation. Jordan sat back slightly, assessing him. Not hostile. Just a man caught in a current he hadn't created. But still, a current that could drown her if she resisted the wrong way. She slowly reached down, retrieved her carry-on from beneath the seat, and handed it to him without a word. He opened it on the tray table in front of her. Documents, a travel-sized toiletries kit, a planner, a book on ethical leadership, everything meticulously organized. Then his hand slipped into a side pouch. He paused. His eyes shifted. He withdrew a small package, vacuum-sealed, tight, and unmistakably suspicious to anyone uninformed. It was the kind of thing used to transport narcotics discreetly, and it had no business being in her bag. The air around her shrank. Jordan didn't say a word at first. She didn't need to. The captain had returned. She was now standing directly beside Tricia, looking down at the pouch with exaggerated astonishment. This, Whitmore declared, raising the item into the air for passengers to see, was found in her bag. A murmur moved through first class like static before a storm. Passengers turned. A few began whispering. Others pulled out their phones. Jordan, still seated, kept her eyes on the captain. I didn't put that in my bag, she said, her voice calm, almost chilling in its certainty. Captain Whitmore's expression didn't change. Are you accusing a federal officer of lying? I'm stating a fact, Jordan replied. That's not mine. The air marshal looked conflicted, but the rules were clear. Ma'am, he said quietly, we need you to come with us to the rear of the plane while we contact ground security. Jordan stood slowly, lifting her satchel and placing her phone into her coat pocket. As she stepped into the aisle, she turned her head just enough to address Whitmore, her voice low enough for only the crew to hear. You think this is the end of a story, she said, but it's only the beginning of yours. And with that, she walked. Behind her, silence filled the aisle. Because even though she had just been publicly humiliated, escorted away like a criminal, no one who saw her walk believed she was anything close to defeated. Not even the ones who framed her. Especially not them. They had no idea who she was, but they were about to find out. And by the time they did, it would be too late to undo what they started. The rear cabin of Flight 227 felt colder than the rest of the plane. Not because of the air conditioning, but because of the silence. Tense, deliberate, the kind that wrapped around Jordan Blake like a noose pulled just tight enough to constrict, but not snap. The air marshal, who escorted her, hadn't spoken much since they left first class. His body language was professional, neutral, but Jordan recognized the subtle cues of uncertainty. He didn't quite know what to make of her. He expected panic, or excuses, maybe even tears. But Jordan had only given him silence and grace. She sat now, hands folded, legs crossed, as though she were waiting for a coffee in a quiet cafe, rather than being suspected of smuggling narcotics mid-flight. Her phone sat in her lap, the screen still open on the Notes app, where she'd been documenting every microaggression from gate to seat. Across from her, the marshal finally spoke. If there's something you want to say, ma'am, now would be a good time. Jordan met his gaze, holding it just long enough to let the silence stretch. Then she reached into the inner pocket of her coat and withdrew a small leather case. No sudden movement, no drama, just deliberate, practiced confidence. She flipped it open and placed it on the tray table between them. The gold shield caught the overhead light, and just like that, the balance of power shifted. It wasn't a badge worn for decoration. It wasn't a souvenir. It was the real thing. The seal read, Chief of Police, Los Angeles Metropolitan Division. The air marshal blinked once, then leaned forward. His eyes traced the name, the title, the hologram of verification embedded beneath the leather surface. Then, without looking up, he reached for the intercom. Jordan stopped him with a single word. Wait. He hesitated. She leaned forward slightly. I want to explain exactly what's happening here before this becomes something much bigger than a flight delay. Her voice was steady, no longer soft, but commanding. I'm on my way to speak at the National Law Enforcement Ethics Conference in Chicago. I was off duty, traveling alone. This was supposed to be the first flight I've taken in 15 years, where I wasn't carrying a badge. I didn't want to be seen as a cop today. I just wanted to be a person. She let that land before continuing. But someone on this crew decided that someone like me didn't belong in first class. So they created a situation. And now, I'm sitting here being treated like a suspect because of the assumptions made about my skin before I even sat down. The marshal finally spoke, quieter now. That package in your bag wasn't mine, she interrupted. You'll find a surveillance device in my coat lapel, active since the beginning of the flight. It recorded everything, including the moment your flight attendant placed that package inside my carry-on when I went to the restroom. The marshal looked stunned. His eyes flicked to her lapel, then to the badge again. I'm going to need to make a call, he said. I already did, Jordan replied. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a second phone. This one, encrypted, secure. She tapped it once and passed it across the table. Put it on speaker. A voice answered on the first ring. Calm, authoritative. Chief Blake, we've confirmed your signal. We're en route to the tarmac in Chicago. Local law enforcement is on standby. FAA has been alerted. The marshal straightened. Understood, Jordan said, then ended the call. She turned back to the stunned officer in front of her. This isn't just a bad judgment call. It's a federal offense. Tampering with a passenger's property, falsely accusing a government official, smuggling contraband. And the worst part is that none of this would have happened if I didn't look like me. The marshal nodded slowly, his expression tightening with the weight of realization. I believe you, he said. I don't need you to believe me, she replied. I need you to do your job the right way, from this moment forward. He stood, speaking into his radio as he moved toward the front of the aircraft. Jordan sat still, not out of caution, but control. She knew exactly what was coming next, and she wasn't going to miss it. 10 minutes later, just as the plane began its descent toward O'Hare, there was a quiet flurry of movement in first class. The captain had been called back to the cabin. Tricia, no longer wearing the composed expression of earlier, had paled. A supervisor's voice came through the intercom, requesting the attention of specific crew members upon landing. Jordan returned to her seat, escorted this time not by suspicion, but by vindication. The silence in the cabin was deafening as passengers noticed her return. Phones subtly turned back on, cameras discreetly raised. No one said a word as she reclaimed Tricia didn't look at her. Captain Whitmore didn't even approach. Because by now, the crew had received word from the ground. They knew who she was and what they had just done. As the plane touched down and the tires kissed the runway, Jordan closed her eyes. Not from relief, but from resolution. This wasn't over. This was just the landing, and the fallout was about to begin. The wheels of Flight 227 had barely cooled on the tarmac at O'Hare when the storm officially broke. By the time the aircraft taxied to the gate, the footage had already begun to circulate. Grainy smartphone clips shared in real time by stunned passengers, accompanied by captions that lit the internet ablaze. Flight attendant frames, black woman in first class. She was calm. They called her dangerous. And finally, the one that cracked open the whole truth. Turns out, she's the chief of police. Inside the terminal, the buzz of arriving passengers was soon replaced by something quieter, heavier. A stillness that comes only when a collective realizes it's been witness to something seismic. Something that couldn't be brushed off with a half-hearted apology or a corporate press release. Jordan Blake disembarked the aircraft without security escort. No cuffs, no shame. Just her quiet, commanding presence, eyes forward, stride steady, as uniformed officers flanked her not to detain, but to protect. On the jet bridge, waiting with a tightened jaw and a phone glued to his ear, stood Ronald Levin, Regional Director for Horizon Air. He'd spent the last hour scrambling through legal advisories, conference calls, and damage control, only to receive a final devastating email. The woman involved is Chief Jordan Blake of the Los Angeles Metro Police. Video is circulating. Prepare for full crisis response. He opened his mouth to speak, but Jordan didn't break stride. She walked past him without a word, accompanied by two federal agents now assuming control of the investigation. It wasn't personal. She just knew this moment wasn't about explanations. It was about evidence. And the time for apologies would come later, if at all. Back inside the aircraft, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The crew, once smug and dismissive, now sat in stunned silence as officers from the Department of Transportation boarded. Tricia Lang, the flight attendant at the center of the storm, was asked to step off the plane. Her hands trembled as she unclipped her ID badge. She tried to meet the passengers' eyes, but no one gave her the dignity of acknowledgement. Captain Whitmore followed seconds later. The man whose authority had hovered over every escalation now stood exposed, his command stripped bare by the weight of his choices. He walked slower, his posture less assured, as cameras from local news crews gathered outside the gate to capture every second of what had become a reckoning in motion. The airline's internal investigation never had a chance to stay internal. Within hours, major outlets ran breaking news banners. Chief of police framed mid-flight. Racial profiling at 30,000 feet. Flight crew suspended amid criminal inquiry. The footage from Jordan's lapel camera was reviewed in secure rooms by federal prosecutors, who issued immediate directives to preserve every second of airport and in-flight security recordings. No detail would be lost. No excuse would be sufficient. At a hastily arranged press conference that afternoon, Horizon Air's CEO, Graham Caldwell, faced the nation with a face trained to look regretful. He read the words handed to him by legal teams and PR advisors with practiced sincerity. We are horrified by the events that took place aboard Flight 227. Let me be clear. Discrimination has no place on our aircraft. What happened to Chief Jordan Blake is unacceptable, and we will cooperate fully with federal authorities in their investigation. But outside the safety of the boardroom, people weren't buying it. Because this wasn't just a bad apple scenario. It was a tree grown from soil that had been left toxic for too long. Civil rights groups pounced, demanding sweeping policy overhauls. Social media erupted. Hashtags like Number Justice for Jordan and Number Flying. While black soared to the top of trending lists, thousands shared their own stories. Quiet humiliations, denied upgrades, undue searches, coded language from gate agents, all the microaggressions that suddenly looked more sinister under the harsh spotlight of this viral case. And then came the fallout. Tricia Lang was arrested for obstruction of justice, falsifying a report, and tampering with evidence. Her attempt to claim protocol fell apart under the weight of Jordan's footage, passenger videos, and damning timestamps that outlined a premeditated effort to set Jordan up. Captain Whitmore faced immediate administrative leave, his license suspended pending review by the FAA. A deeper dive into his past flight logs and incident reports revealed multiple complaints, none of which had been properly escalated. It painted a picture of quiet tolerance, a system that had always prioritized reputation over accountability. Even Brenda Marsh, the gate agent who had flagged Jordan's unusual boarding pass, was not immune. Emails surfaced showing a pattern of unexplained verifications tied disproportionately to passengers of color. When asked for comment, the airline declined. But the optics were undeniable. The rot had been institutional. Jordan, meanwhile, said little. She gave no interviews, declined every request to appear on television or issue a statement. Her silence was not one of retreat, but of strategy. She let the truth speak for itself. She let the footage play on every screen. and she let the public draw its own conclusions about what it meant when a woman like her was treated like a threat, even when she'd said nothing, done nothing, except sit in a seat someone else believed she hadn't earned. But within the law enforcement world, her impact was thunderous. Officers across jurisdictions sent messages of support, many with their own stories of being stopped, searched, questioned, even as they wore the badge. Some from rural towns, some from major cities, all with the same message. That could have been me. The incident triggered an emergency summit between federal aviation authorities and national police organizations. New mandates began to emerge: implicit bias training, independent passenger rights ombudsman, clearer accountability structures. What had been ignored for years was suddenly too costly to overlook. And for the airline, the lawsuits came swiftly. Jordan herself filed no suit, but her legal team made one thing clear. This was not about compensation. It was about commitment to structural change, not PR stunts. The airline's legal department knew it was already too late to contain the damage. It could only try to mitigate it. Yet for all the headlines, the press conferences, the hashtags, perhaps the most powerful moment happened a week later, during a training session at Horizon Air's headquarters. The video being shown to every employee, not an instructional, not a reenactment, but raw footage, unedited. Jordan Blake, seated in 2A, calm and poised as a crew tried to turn her into a criminal. It was now required viewing, and the closing message was simple. This is what happens when you forget who you're speaking to. This is what happens when bias blinds you. And this is what justice looks like when it finally arrives. Jordan had said almost nothing publicly, and yet somehow she'd spoken louder than anyone, because the truth didn't need volume. It just needed to land. And once it did, it could never be ignored again. The media headlines eventually faded. The viral videos were replaced by newer scandals, fresher outrage. But something remained. Something that didn't go away when the cameras shut off or the trending hashtags cooled. It was the ripple, the quiet wave of change set in motion, not by a press release or a speech, but by the way Chief Jordan Blake carried herself through injustice with unshakable dignity. Jordan didn't seek vengeance. She sought structure, reform, a future where no one else would have to endure what she did just to sit in the seat they paid for. Under her guidance, a joint task force between Horizon Air, civil rights organizations, and federal transportation authorities began drafting one of the most comprehensive anti-discrimination frameworks the aviation industry had ever seen. She didn't do it alone, but without her, it never would have happened. At the heart of the new guidelines were systems that took power away from subjective gatekeeping. Algorithms replaced manual screening for upgrades and seat selections. Anonymous reporting tools were embedded into boarding passes. And every employee, from the tarmac crew to the C-suite executives, underwent intensive bias recognition training. Not a box-ticking exercise, but real, confrontational education grounded in lived experience. Yet Jordan knew policy wasn't enough. Culture needed changing too. That's why she showed up. Not in a press conference, but in classrooms, training rooms, private debriefs with young officers and new flight attendants. She never gave them horror stories or hero tales. She just asked questions. What will you do when it's your turn to intervene? What will you risk to make someone feel like they belong? Her presence alone changed the energy in those rooms. She wasn't an icon. She was a mirror. showing people who they were and who they could be if they chose courage over comfort. Months after the incident, a little girl sat on the edge of her seat in a school auditorium as Jordan spoke during a community event. The girl, wide-eyed, raised her hand and asked, "Are you still scared when people treat you unfair?" Jordan smiled. "I used to be," she said, "but now I'm something stronger. I'm ready." And perhaps that's the legacy she leaves. Not just justice served, not just careers exposed, but a blueprint for what it means to rise. Not for revenge, but for responsibility, for grace, for every quiet voice that deserves to be heard before it's silenced by assumption. Jordan never asked to be a symbol, but she became one, not because of what was done to her, but because of what she built after. A new flight plan, one that rises higher than fear, one that refuses to descend into hate, and one that ensures the next Jordan Blake never has to prove she belongs. She just boards the plane and is seen. Jordan Blake's story didn't begin with the slap that echoed through the first-class cabin. It began long before, with decades of discipline, service, and quiet resilience. A decorated police chief, Jordan had spent her career protecting communities, challenging systemic flaws from within, and believing in the power of institutions to improve. But none of that stopped her from being profiled, humiliated, and assaulted for one reason: the color of her skin. What happened on Flight 708 wasn't just about a power-drunk pilot or a racially biased airline. It was a mirror held up to society. In one split-second decision, when a captain's hand struck her face, Jordan became a national symbol, not of victimhood, but of unflinching dignity. She didn't retaliate with anger or chaos. She responded with truth, with calm, and most importantly, with accountability. Her badge wasn't just a token of authority. It was a shield of justice, and she used it, not to punish, but to awaken. From the moment she revealed her identity, the narrative unraveled. The same people who had ignored her voice were forced to reckon with it. Careers collapsed. Corporate walls shook. But more powerfully, hearts and minds across the country began to shift. Her story became a catalyst for change, not just in policy, but in culture. Through her actions, Jordan reminded us of something essential: that justice is not just about reacting to injustice. It's about building systems where dignity is protected proactively, where presence doesn't require permission, where silence is not mistaken for consent. So what can we learn from Chief Jordan Blake? We learn that true power is quiet. It's found in self-control, in courage, in the unrelenting choice to act with principle when others expect retaliation. We learn that racism doesn't always shout. It whispers. It avoids eye contact. It questions legitimacy. And when it does, we must be ready to speak, stand, and hold the line, not just for ourselves, but for those who cannot. In our own lives, whether in airports, workplaces, or everyday interactions, we must carry this story with us. We must recognize bias when it's subtle, intervene when it's easy to stay silent, document what matters, demand better. Jordan's journey shows us that one woman's strength can transform an entire system. But real change comes when that strength is echoed in all of us. If this story moved you, inspired you, or opened your eyes in any way, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue telling these vital stories, stories that speak truth, seek justice, and celebrate the everyday heroes among us. Let's keep flying forward, together. Subscribe now, and we'll see you in the next story.